Hey there, guys. Welcome to Breakfast All Day. So fantastic to have you. Christy here with Alonso, and our brilliant friend, Kyle Buchanan, is joining us today to talk about his new Mad Max book. There it is, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road. Kyle Buchanan.
It is.
Welcome.
It's me. Thank you for having me.
We're so lucky that you have some time because besides being a brilliant author, you are also the awards pundit for the New York Times. So this is like your busy season anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very crazy next few weeks. I mean, it usually is right before the Oscars, but especially so this year because everything got delayed, postponed, pushed to March. So yeah, now while I'm out there, selling the book, there's a whole lot of award shows and other columns to be written. It's a lot, but
Yes.
I mean, I can't complain. Those are fun to go to, and so are the things for the book. Tonight, I'm going to a Brooklyn reading from the book that is staged entirely with Brooklyn drag queens in Mad Max outfits. I can't wait.
Nice.
Perfect. The perfect marriage of all the things that matter to you. So when you first saw Mad Max Fury Road, what did you think of it?
Where is she taking them?
I mean, it truly is, I think, the only time my jaw's literally been dropped by a film. I was like, oh yeah, no, this is actually happening. My jaw is barely connected to the rest of my skull. I think it also made me realize, because it was so, I mean, it's so exciting and so visceral, duh, right? We know that. But it's also so creative, so imaginative, so consistently giving you things that you don't see or expect, which is a tall order, not just at that budget level or from an action film, but also just period. I mean, it also, resumed a franchise that we've gotten 3 of already. So for it to be such a sort of revelation to me, and in such an exciting way, for it to marry like art and commerce and action and real sort of highfalutin stuff, it just felt like completely unlike anything else. And it made me realize that maybe we'd been settling. I mean, I like a really good action movie, or I like a good studio action movie. I like a good superhero movie. But I think too often, like, I'd let my bar get a little low, to say like, sure, I liked it. And to have, your hair blown back by something like Fury Road, it's just like, no, this is what filmmaking and action filmmaking ought to be like.
Is this a project, speaking of the book now, that you initiated, or somebody come to you and say, hey, this would make a great oral history?
A little bit of both. I started writing it in the spring of 2020, which was when, the movie release calendar fell apart. Nothing was coming out anymore. And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to write about? Because that's my day job, is writing about new movies. And I remembered it was about to be the 5th anniversary of Fury Road. And I thought, okay, well, if I can kind of, pull something like that together, it's at least something to do. And also, I'd heard wild stories about the making of it. I kind of thought maybe 5 years was enough time for people to speak a little more openly, but also remember things pretty vividly. And that's exactly what happened. It also helped in that regard that, in April 2020, people like Charlize Theron and George Miller and Zoe Kravitz, people whose lives are scheduled out for the next year or two, had nothing to do. Everybody was sitting at home. Like, why are we paying our publicists? So
it was a great time for podcasts too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right. So fortunately, it worked out pretty well, and I put together at that time like about a 24-person oral history for the Times. But that was truly just scratching the surface. I went back and I reread it recently, the Times piece, and I was like, wow, I thought this was so big at the time, 5,000 words, but it really isn't. It's just a fraction of the Fury Road story, because everyone who worked on that film, from the biggest, name people to all the people on the crew, have incredible stories to tell about the making of it.
And you can tell that they are changed on a cellular level by this experience. It sounds so arduous. What did you learn? You talked to like 130 people. It's crazy. What did you learn along the way that surprised you the most?
I think what's interesting is when we talk about like auteurs, right? And certainly George Miller, nobody makes movies quite like him. He barely makes movies quite like himself, because he's always changing it up, whether he's going from, Lorenzo's Oil to Happy Feet to Fury Road. But even though he's so specific and so exacting and obviously an incredible visionary, he also really trusts the people in his orbit to kind of bring things that he wouldn't expect. So even though it's so tempting to attribute all of Fury Road's success to one man, what I think was really exciting about the book, and especially the oral history format, is that you get a sense of like how everybody made this movie and this experience their own, from like, the prop master who made that flaming guitar to the assistant dramaturge who had to corral all of these stuntmen and kind of train them to get into the war boy spirit and make up their own names and their backstories and all of this to make it feel real, because it felt so real for everybody on set. I mean, Zoe Kravitz was like, we literally were in a war rig speeding across the desert, surrounded by these wild cars that were built for real with like shrieking stuntmen as war boys. And that environment, that vibe did not quit, that kept up for the entire time they were there. So as an author, that's a great thing, because you have the sort of themes and ideas and world of the movie bleeding into the real life of the people who participated in it.
Were there any moments at which you were getting very conflicting stories, or was pretty much everybody remembering things the same way?
I would say that over time, especially over this amount of time, there starts to be an official narrative, right? And if you ask George Miller about kind of the genesis of Fury Road, he now likes to tell the story about crossing the street in LA and suddenly like all these things just sort of occurred to him and fell out of his head. The real story is more complicated than that, as it often is. The seeds for Fury Road were planted when these, television executives were like, hey, maybe we can do like a Xena Hercules type show with Mad Max.
Oh my God.
And they got him thinking about it and set him up with these other writers who started kind of spinning around some ideas that did transmute themselves into what we see in Fury Road. So it's never quite as simple as I think a lot of people would tell it. And that's part of the fun of doing this book too, is finding these writers who worked on the film who are not credited, but whose contributions to it were pretty notable.
One of the big things, of course, that is coming out and getting some headlines all these years later is the way that Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron really did not get along on set. How hard was it to get each of them to open up to you about what that dynamic was like?
I got to give Charlize a lot of credit, because I think she foresaw that she would be setting off another media cycle of these things. She is proud of the movie for sort of rising above all those narratives, but they're real, they exist. And the great thing about Charlize that I give her a lot of credit for, having interviewed her a couple of times now, is that she almost thrives on you asking her difficult questions. She doesn't want just like softballs. She doesn't want you to just come in there and be like, what do you love about living in LA? Or like, what are you doing for Christmas this year? She wants you to really engage in themes and ideas of the movie that she's promoting, if it's a good one, or just like life. And so I knew that if I asked her these questions, they're not pleasant memories. And she's savvy enough to know what's going to happen if she answers them truthfully. But that doesn't stop her from backing down, or that doesn't stop her from actually giving you the true situation.
Oral histories are just books that will go in deep on all the nuts and bolts of the production of one single film.
Yeah.
And more often than not, the really fun and just compellingly readable stories are about the flops. You read like The Devil's Candy or, Final Cut, and like these gargantuan productions that get out of control. And on paper, like this one threatened to be that at so many times. Is there anything that you can sort of pinpoint that sort of like makes a big gamble like this work, as opposed to the many times when it hasn't?
Okay, two answers to that. One is you're exactly right in what you said about these books that chronicle the very juicy making of flops. I'd add to that Monster, the film that the book that John Gregory Dunn wrote about the making of Up Close and Personal.
Right.
How it turned from this, tragedy about a newswoman killing herself to like a frothy Michelle Pfeiffer romance. It's a fascinating story, and I eat up those were incredibly influential to me. But what I kind of felt like what we were missing is a really juicy making of story that feels like it's going to be a flop and turns out to be a masterpiece. Like, how'd they pull that off? And I think the answer is that there's a real razor thin margin between flop and masterpiece. You know, the things about Fury Road that Warner Brothers blanched at are like reasonable things in some degrees, you know, like really crazy tone, really like pushing the envelope, stuff that you don't usually see in a movie before. And that could have so easily turned south. I mean, a lot of the people who worked on this movie were starting to get convinced that they were making a big flop. And that's part of what contributed to the anxiety and the tension on that set. You know, what the studio bean counters and the producers and executives have to do is a tricky thing that I actually give them some credit for. I don't want to completely make them the villains of this story, because if George Miller comes to you and says, I want to make Fury Road, already you're like, okay, this is a little bit different than our usual. This is a movie a franchise that hasn't been exhumed in a while. You haven't made a live action movie in a while.
Where's the script? Oh, there is no script.
There's no script. And also at the same time, you know, we know now that those things all worked out fine, but there are also things that he proposed that didn't. Do you commit to the madness totally, or do you pull back at certain points? I wouldn't know how to navigate that. And it's fascinating that, you know, sometimes that was navigated the wrong way and sometimes the right way, but it all worked out in the end through perseverance and a little bit of luck.
Kyle, you're amazing. You are at Kyle Buchanan on Twitter and Instagram, correct?
Yes. I'm on Twitter, and you can follow me at the New York Times. My column comes out every Wednesday online and every Thursday in print.
And your book's everywhere. The book's Alonso's holding it up.
Books everywhere. I'm hearing it's sold out a bunch of places, which is heartening.
Amazing.
Although I want you to be able to get it. So
it's
keep
so
looking.
great. It's like the juiciest, funnest read. I zipped through it in like 2 days. So congrats to you. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I think, you know, obviously if you like Fury Road, it's right up your alley. But I think if you're just kind of curious about how movies are made, there are not many stories about a crazier making of than this one.
For sure.
For sure.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for watching. Like this video, subscribe at BeFast All Day on social media. Patreon.com/BeFastAllDay is our Patreon page. We hope you'll check that out, and we hope you will pick up a copy of Blood, Sweat, and Chrome. It is delicious. Thanks for being here, Kyle. Talk to you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye.